Welcome to Season 2 of the Leopard Podcast. This season, I speak with visionary lodge owners operating in Africa's most remote and pristine regions. Get ready for tales of deep commitment to conservation, extraordinary wildlife, and the dedication it takes to run a lodge at the edge of the world. Hi, Chris, and welcome to the podcast.
Thanks, Dana. Good to see you again.
So we're talking about Madagascar today, which is very exciting for me because I love this place. And I thought we'd start off explaining to listeners a little bit about this magical island, especially those listeners who've never visited Madagascar. How would you describe it?
I think that'll probably be most of your listeners. So, who've never been. It's an incredible island that is kind of unlike anything you can kind of imagine. Of course, depending on your generation, you've either seen the movie Madagascar, I Like to Move It, or you read the I. So people do have some conception, but I think in your head you have this idea of an island that has an interesting mix of biodiversity. But there's so much more to it than that. I mean, it's a massive island. So fourth largest in the world after Greenland, Papua New Guinea, and Borneo. 1,600 kilometers north to south and almost 600 kilometers wide at its widest point. So it's a big place. That's one of the things that people don't realize before they go. And in that big place, you've got this incredible biodiversity. So a really good mix of habitat, biome, vegetation types. And then within it, I don't even know let's say it's a 10,000 kilometer coastline. So you've got this tropical island vibe as well. And even the branding of the National Tourism Marketing Agency is Treasure Island. So there's a piracy element, but it speaks to the sort of bounty of natural treasure. And not just in terms of natural biodiversity, but also in terms of people. So the people in Madagascar Madagascar was colonized from Borneo, actually, Sulawesi. So, let's say Southeast Asian, and that comes through in the dialects, in the appearance of the people. And they colonized somewhere between 1,500 and 2,000 years ago. And then Africans came later on from the east coast of Africa. And so you now end up with a blend of supposedly 50% in terms of genetics, Southeast Asian and African, depending on where you are on the island. And I think that maybe sums up the sort of, in a microcosm, the bizarreness of the island. There's nowhere else on the planet where Asians and Africans have mixed over that time. And, it's a treasure chest of culture, of biodiversity, of scenery, of bizarreness. I mean, giraffe-necked weevils, which are a bizarre little insect, the tsingy, which is a sort of limestone formation that is also otherworldly. Obviously the rainforest is incredible. And then the tropical, never mind the spiny forest in the south, which is a kind of arid zone where you get these octopus plants. And, I think there's 7 baobab species in the world, of which 6 occur in Madagascar, 5 indigenous, 1 introduced. So it's bizarre. I think depending on who we're talking to, it's either a tropical island paradise or it's an incredible, probably one of the most interesting natural laboratories of evolution in the world. So we'll talk to both of those guests, audience, if you like.
Yeah, I really like the way you've described the uniqueness of Madagascar here. I think it's unique in so many ways and really difficult to describe to people who've never been there. But I think you've given us a little bit of a taste. Let's dive into the wildlife for a minute. People who've been to Africa have perhaps experienced a safari where they've seen lion, they've seen elephant, they've seen hopefully some leopard. But the wildlife experience in Madagascar is completely different from mainland Africa. How would you describe those differences to people?
Sure, extreme. The differences are extreme. So none of that megafauna that you would get in Africa, but so no lions and giraffe and elephants and what have you. All of those species are extinct. Some relatively recently, but things like hippo did occur there in the past. Now, what you have is an island, a landmass, in effect, sometimes called the 8th continent, that's separated from Africa somewhere between 80 and 90 million years ago. And as it separated from Africa, the species that it shared with Africa became extinct. and it had colonization events at a much later stage by animals primarily from Africa, although are some Asian affinities, but primarily from Africa, that then found a whole lot of unoccupied niches. So lemurs, for example, which is obviously the key kind of species that people come to see, birds and lemurs, and a whole variety of other mammals, but lemurs just primarily. The evolutionary theory here, and proven through genetic analysis, is that so Madagascar separates 80 to 90 million years ago from Africa. Somewhere between 50 and 60 million years ago, you get a single colonization event by a single species of prosimian, so a primitive primate, something like a galago that comes from Africa, probably on a raft of vegetation that's washed out to sea from an African river in a flood. And incredibly, it makes it across to Madagascar. It never happens again. And that single colonization event then turns into 120 different lemur species. So lemurs that find, as I said, a whole lot of vacant niches and then evolve to fill all of those over the last 50 million years. So let's say it was a bush baby galago type species that colonized. That's nocturnal. It feeds on gum, flowers and what have you, a little bit of protein. And then that evolves to become probably 40 diurnal species that range in size from an Indri, which is the largest species, down to what would be the biggest diurnal species, mostly bigger than nocturnal species, but ranging down in size to something smaller than a galago, so in the mouse lemurs, of which there are at least 20 species. So you get a huge range of lemurs as a result of that. And then there are other colonization events. So you get a whole endemic family of carnivores, for example, that don't have relatives anywhere else in the world. It's literally that family occurs only in Madagascar. And it has the Fossa or Fossa, the Voncira, which are kinds of mongooses, and a couple of other Fossa fossana. It's a funnelloca. It's like a civet. I suppose the equivalent would be a civet. And again, these are supposed to have evolved from one colonist. So one species of carnivore that then became multiple species. The same with the tenrecs, which are like shrews, which have adapted to, so again, one shrew, proto-shrew, comes from Africa and ends up being 20 odd species that are shrews, that are shrew otters, that are almost like hedgehogs. They've got spines. There are 3 or 4 species with spines. And so you get this bizarre kind of suite of species that you just can't see anywhere else in the world. So in a sense, Madagascar has a monopoly on these species. And they are so bizarre and so different as to be, I think, bucket list. So anyone who's interested in nature is going to do Africa and see the megafauna of Africa, is probably going to go to the Galapagos at some point, or the Amazon, or Australasia, or Antarctica, or the Arctic. The Galapagos gets celebrated a lot as a kind of natural laboratory. Darwin was there. You've got Darwin's finches. You can track the evolution of and physiological change, anatomical change of these finches, so that as they're separated by islands that emerge and separate from each other, they develop different forms and adapt to different niches. That I don't know, maybe there are 13 Darwin's finches. I'm not sure. 120 lemurs in all different sizes, shapes, colors is a whole lot easier for people to see the extreme adaptive radiation that happens in Madagascar. I know this is sounding very technical now, so if I just leave the technical behind for a bit, there's some really cool species there that are colorful, that are charismatic, that are super cool, and that your kids have seen in an animated film. So it's definitely worth going to see. And the bonus is that you get to see a little bit about adaptive radiation and get to grips with a better understanding, I think, of our own evolution and the planet's biodiversity evolution as well.
Yeah, it's fascinating, Chris. And I think it's definitely giving people a reason to go to Madagascar alongside Galapagos and these other incredible places. And just to make another point on that, it might sound obvious to some listeners, but I think it's still worth saying that the wildlife experience in Madagascar is quite different from mainland Africa, to where you generally on a safari vehicle being taken around by a guide and you're sitting and being shown these incredible animals that are found on mainland Africa. In Madagascar, it's all about walking, which I really love. You get much closer proximity to nature. You're walking through rainforests to see these lemurs, or in the south in the arid regions to see the baobabs. So that's just another point on how these might be different. You've mentioned quite a number.
Sorry to interrupt. And completely benign. So that in Africa, you're needing the vehicle and an armed guide and what have you, and you don't want your kids to get eaten. This is literally a paradise where you can let your kids run free. There's nothing poisonous that's going to kill them. There's no carnivore that's going to eat them. There's no giant elephant megafauna that's going to stomp them. So it really is, I mean, and in a sense for adults even, like going back to your childhood and a sense of discovery for things that you didn't know existed.
Absolutely. From personal experience, I can say the same about how safe I felt with my kids in Madagascar. When I arrived on the island and they found a snake, and I asked the guide whether this was potentially a dangerous snake, and he told me there's absolutely no poisonous or dangerous animals on this island. I was in paradise because my kids love interacting with nature and observing things close up, and it was great to know that they could never be in harm's way in Madagascar, which is just fantastic and gives you a really different feeling for the place, which was one thing that surprised me about Madagascar, that there were no dangerous animals on the island. What else could be things that surprise people when they arrive on Madagascar for the first time?
I think the cultural thing is a big one. So people arrive expecting Africa and they get something that they, again, didn't know existed, this blend of Southeast Asia and Africa, and then with a little bit of French flavor as well. So you've got, obviously in Tananarivo, where you typically arrive and run an international flight, there's definitely a French flavor. So, you've baguettes and sausages hanging, and the architecture has some kind of French colonial element. So that's a surprise. I think the culture's a surprise. The size of the island is a surprise. The extent. I think the poverty is another surprise for people. It is one of the world's poorest countries. And as a result, there's quite a lot of utilization of natural resources that desperately need tourism to pay for their existence, really, which is one of the reasons why we're there. So that often surprises people. So they can arrive expecting tropical rainforest on the highlands, and it's cultivated rice paddies. That's usually one that surprises people. So the highlands are very transformed from that perspective. There obviously is a very good protected area network, but because of the economic challenges, there is impact on wildlife, and that is the big bonus of what tourism can achieve there. Other surprises, I think the extent of the coastline, I don't know what the right word is, but like not a purity or a naivety or a untrammeledness, but if you live in the first world, going to a country like Madagascar does reverse you, call it 100 years or 150 years, in the sense that people are using oxen for functions which in the first world have been done by machines for however long. And so you get that sort of sense. And there's still a very traditional element to burial, for example, there's a custom where, not in all cultures in Madagascar, and that's the other thing, it's not one homogeneous culture. So, Saklava, Betsimisaraka, the Andretoy, there's a whole lot of different cultures, in Madagascar, and they're quite different. In fact, speak different dialects as well. And one of those cultures, roundabout long story, is the turning of the bones. So after a certain amount of time, after someone's been buried, the respectful thing to do is to turn those bones, clean them, and relay them to rest. So there are elements like that are unusual by first world kind of standards or Western standards. Apart from that, I think the other thing is, once you've got that in your head, then you're surprised after that to find first world standard hotels and lodges and incredible standards of guiding. To go back to your point about the guiding in Madagascar, the standard is very high, and very sophisticated in terms of transmitting an understanding of evolution or ecosystems. So there's a funny mix of lots of different things there that just really is its own thing. I mean, it's a surprise in itself.
Yeah, everything is a surprise in Madagascar. So now might be a great time to talk a little bit about your amazing lodge in Madagascar, Chris, Masoala Forest Lodge. Some of the challenges, maybe you can give listeners an idea of some of the challenges of operating a lodge in such a remote part of Madagascar. Also perhaps explain whereabouts it's located in Madagascar, and some of those challenges, and also the benefits of bringing tourists to such a remote part of the country.
Yeah, maybe starting by saying the other thing that people are surprised about when they get there is the size of the place and the logistical challenges to getting around. So that let's identify that as the first challenge. So we are in northeast Madagascar on the Masoala Peninsula, which is the area that has the largest remaining intact rainforest, both mid-altitude and coastal. So that's unusual. And also, I mean, it's in the context of the island, 300,000 hectare conservation area, which is the size of the national park there, is significant. So our first challenge, I guess, is having found it. The second is building something there. The third is supplying it, and the fourth is getting our guests there. And I guess the fifth is in balancing, conservation, tourism, community needs, those sorts of things. So the lodge itself is a 7-room, I guess, traditional eco-lodge. It is traditional safari tents on raised platforms in the rainforest, so you're within the canopy overlooking the beach. And so it has the lodge itself has a blend of rainforest and tropical island marine kind of paradise, so shore entry snorkeling and very gentle waves and warm ocean and so on. A lot is grown locally, so getting, broccoli is a challenge, but getting tomatoes or fish is not a challenge, or pineapples or coconuts. So you adjust to what you've got there. And in that sense, I think the founders of the lodge and our partners there, Pierre and Maria Besta, have been excellent in using what's available, celebrating what's available, and really being intentional about limiting the degree of impact in any sense. So there's no plastic. They don't even use Tupperwares. It's a glass jar. So your snacks on your walk will be locally sourced peanuts and in a glass jar. There's certainly no cling film or anything like that. That's just abhorrent. So you can't have that. And the fish is bought locally every day there's a small village of about 200 people a couple of kilometers up the coast from us. So the fish is bought from them. They cultivate rice, vanilla, cloves, that sort of thing, peppers and so on. So a lot of our procurement is like that. And I guess the challenge for guests is access. So when you go to Madagascar, big place, it's bigger than you expect. You want to see ring-tailed lemurs, you want to see Indri, you want to see ruffed lemurs, you want to have a beach experience, you want to see the tsingy, you want to see the baobabs. And until you start planning, you don't realize that those are all 1,000 kilometers apart. So you got to start, I guess, from your big picture. I want to do everything. So I want to go to China and see everything. And then you get down to the point where you're like, okay, I'm going to be in Beijing, I can get to the wall, and what else can I do? So we're in the northeast. I would say, let's say there's 10 lodges in Madagascar that play a similar role to us in the sense that they focus very much on conservation and they have an African kind of approach to it in the sense of safari style with all-inclusive and guiding and so on and so forth. And then combining those lodges, if that's what you're interested in, that's where the logistical challenges come in. And so most of these businesses would, like us, provide a charter flight on a couple of days or 3 days a week. So that you're not dependent on either driving very long distances on roads that are not necessarily in great shape or flying on the domestic airline on routes that are not mainstream, and so they fly very seldom. So, for example, the mainstream airline, the domestic airline, flies once a week to us and wouldn't always fly on the day that you might necessarily have booked on. So that's, I'd say that's perhaps the major challenge, the logistics of things. But the rewards are amazing. So by the time you get to us, you feel like you couldn't be further from wherever you came from. It's a flight from Tana into the local sort of regional town called Maransetra. So the flight is, let's say, an hour and a half in a caravan. You then met at the airport by our team, driven to our boat harbour, and that's, let's say, a 20-minute drive. Then you might have a snack at an orientation and briefing, and then you're boating across the ocean for an hour and a half to get to where we are. By the time you get to us, you literally can reach us only by boat or on foot. And on foot, that's going to take you a few days to get there. And it's, I don't know where you're going to stay on the way, but it's an interesting walk, but it's not typical for our guests to do it. So by the time you get there, you really are remote, and you are loving the fact that you're disconnected, that you are disconnected from the modern world, reconnected to the weather's important today. Where does food come from today? Is the food fresh? What is that grows here? What can I see? What can I do? And so you're very, I think, and it's funny, this always sounded a bit hippie to talk about 25 years ago, but these days with, I don't know, the new world and wellness and presence and intentionality and what have you, I think this is something that really resonates with people. So we do provide Wi-Fi, but you're certainly not going to get a cell phone signal. And yeah, it's great to be disconnected. Does that give you some sense of challenges?
Yeah, a great sense of the challenges, but also the beauty of being there, being disconnected, being in this really remote place. And I've been really lucky in this season of the podcast to speak to lodges similar to this in very, very remote places like Christina Plattner from Kamba and these kind of things. And I think this really is what makes it so special to plan a trip like that. So you've given me many directions we can go in here, Chris, but I think let's touch on conservation again. Let's go back to conservation for a minute, because that's the reason you mentioned there are other lodges like you in Madagascar, but that's really the reason you're in business. And this is very difficult to do in a country where you've mentioned the poverty is such high levels of poverty. People want to get out of poverty. And the easiest way for them to do that is deforestation, planting rice fields, or many other ways of using the natural world that is not necessarily good for conservation. So at Masoala, and if you want to talk in general about Madagascar, what are some of the conservation success stories? First of all, it's great to hear the success stories and challenges facing the preservation of this incredible biodiversity in today's world.
Yeah, I think, look, that is the really rewarding thing about tourism from our perspective, is that not only do you give people life-changing experiences and new perspectives, I'm talking about our guests, but you do the same, I think, for local communities. And the outcome of both of those things should be something that's better for the planet. And I think at Masoala, what Pierre Maria kind of set up and what we've built on in recent years is exactly that. So this community of 200 people were living there before the national park was established. And as a result, the enclave around them is excluded from the park. But as that population grows, or as rice fields get less productive, they need more land to produce more rice. Malagasy, by the way, I think are the biggest consumers of rice per capita in the world. And rice makes up a huge part of every meal, drinks, meals, pudding, main courses, everything. So, that and of course the root of all of these conservation challenges is human population growth and utilization of natural resources. So it's inevitable that people will use these things. And, fortunately here they also have access to a source of protein in the form of fish. So they don't have to, there are other parts of Madagascar where bushmeat hunting of lemurs or even carnivores is a challenge and is an impact on conservation. So here our main challenge is the deforestation. So what we've done there is, in effect, how Pierre and Maria started this was to say, okay, you want to deforest 1 hectare of land. How much rice will that produce a year? Okay, produces 1 bag of rice, 10 bags, whatever the number is. We'll give you 3 times that. So there's food security. We'll pay for that rice using tourism receipts. And all you have to do is not deforest. We don't, so we've got sort of 3 approaches to this. In some cases, we bought land. In other cases, we've leased land. And in other cases, we literally pay for non-deforestation. So I guess if, in an NGO world, I'd be talking about some fancy, sustainable finance for permanence story or what have you. It's just, it's a very basic trade of priorities, resources, what have you. So, and as a result, I think we now protect 85 hectares of coastal rainforest. Now that sounds tiny in the African context, where Kruger would be 1.8 million hectares, or Central Kalahari would be 5 million hectares. It is tiny, but the biodiversity held within that tiny block is quite incredible. So I think in that 85 hectares, I think we have a higher bird count than for Germany, for example, certainly than many countries, for reptiles, for amphibians, for mammals, even for trees. It's a hotspot for palm endemism. So just that 85 hectares of coastal forest is critical, not just in terms of biodiversity, but also in terms of the ecological functions of connecting the coastal rainforest to the primary rainforest that's further inland, of making sure the watersheds are protected and so on. So that's what we aim to do there. And as I say, the crux is food security. So there's an American researcher who's been living there for a while, who is pioneering what's called a bacon bug. I don't remember the genus of this insect, but it is an insect that reproduces rapidly, and it can be a source of protein. So, not just replacing protein, but replacing it in a way that's more sustainable. Otherwise, fishing gets excessive or what have you. So we also are not serving our guests lobster every day, right? So that would kind of defeat the object. It's a particular fish species. We don't do lobster. And then I think there are other examples of this on the island that are worth talking about. So Anjajavi in the northwest would be the equivalent of us in the dry forest. They protect quite a significantly larger area, actually. So I think they own about 600 hectares, and they protect a further couple of thousand. Also off the same principles, and they've been going a bit longer than us. But the using tourism to protect a particular piece of habitat, type of habitat, and then all of the biodiversity that depends on it. So for them, it's dry deciduous forest. For us, it's coastal rainforest. For a camp like Mandrari in the south, it is spiny forest, and so on. So there are some excellent exponents of this on the island that I think are really inspirational, and hopefully generate imitators or some kind of replication of the idea. And that's ultimately what we'd like to achieve in Madagascar, is that everyone kind of takes that approach and says, I can't just buy, not that this is the case, but just using it as an example, I don't just buy a hectare of land next to a national park, build a lodge, and then go into the national park. I should buy the hectare, and then another hectare, and then another hectare, and then another hectare, and I should create a buffer zone for the park. And I should pay for that off the back of tourism. And hopefully, ecotourists, that kinds of people who book your services, will choose to support those lodges because of the impact they make beyond just the experience that someone would have in that lodge, the infrastructure. Like, what's the impact beyond that?
Yeah, I had a wonderful inquiry from a client for her 50th birthday, an Australian client, who asked me, where can I travel in Africa that's going to have the most impact for my tourist dollar? And Madagascar was one of the things on the list. So we discussed budget. Logistics, always a problem. We've spoken a little bit about logistics in Madagascar, but if you come with the mindset that it's going to take you a while to get to a place and the connections are not great, they're getting better, but it's something we have to deal with.
Well, it's interesting. I mean, just before you go on, some of those connections, and and I suppose you've got to have a different attitude to travel, which is not first world efficiency on the Swiss train arriving at 12:01, leaving at 12:01. It's, I met someone interesting at the airport because I had to sit there all day. And then she later took me to her house, which was 300 meters from the airport, and she introduced me to her son and blah, blah, blah. And you have that kind of more nuanced human element of travel that is spontaneous, and it's not repeatable. It's, anyway, I enjoy those kinds of things, but you do have to have an open mind about your schedule.
Yeah, it's a particular type of traveler. For us, it was so funny. We were using the local airline to fly back to Tana, and they moved the flight to 3 hours earlier, which my husband and I were completely surprised about. Like, we're used to flights being later, and it was 3 hours earlier. So we had to basically pack our bags and rush to the airport to catch the flight on time. So it's very unusual, the kind of things that you have to deal with in Madagascar.
Yeah, I did that once, and then they changed it to 12 hours later.
Yeah. Very, very challenging. But if you've just got to go with the mindset, we might arrive home a day later than planned, and that's okay.
Yeah, yeah. And you know,
So,
look, the tropical islands have this attitude a lot of the time. Slowly, slowly, tomorrow, and and people just kind of roll with the punches. That said, I mean, you can travel in Madagascar and avoid those sorts of things. All of those lodges I just mentioned, their flying is reliable and punctual and high standard, and it functions. It's not. But yeah, you can travel many different ways, obviously.
yeah, exactly. But if you have the budget, I definitely would recommend using the scheduled charter flights if possible. So let's talk a little bit about lemurs, because it is probably the most iconic species Madagascar is famous for. I remember being aware of the existence of lemurs from my high school years and always wanting to go and see them, and managed to get there in 2023. Which are your favorite lemur species, either from Masoala? I know you've got some really unique, interesting, I know chameleons, tenrecs, many things, but just talking about lemurs for a second, you've got the eye. What are your favorites?
Yeah. I think, look, I definitely holy grail for lemurs. It's a nocturnal lemur that's completely bizarre, uses almost an element of sonar to find its prey, like larvae in dead wood. And it's got some really crazy kind of physical adaptations. And we see those quite regularly at Masoala, and it's very difficult to see in most places in the island. So that's a bit of a special for there. I'd put that right up there. Indris for me, for sure. It's the biggest species. It's interesting looking. It's like got quite dramatic, black, white, silver gray markings, and it's got a call. I won't play it now, but maybe you can put it over the interview later. But it's got an incredible call that's more kind of like a whale, and that's a bizarre experience. And there's some quite interesting sort of cultural lore around that. So it's called Babakoto in Malagasy, in that dialect of Malagasy, and supposedly rescued a boy that got lost in the forest. So that one, there's a fuddy on that. They typically don't kill Indri for bushmeat. So I love Indris. Ring-tailed lemurs are obviously super charismatic. They're more sociable, and they're partly terrestrial. So you have a different kind of experience watching them. I love mouse lemurs because they're so small. And I can give you a long list here. I would go with sifakas, also partly sort of terrestrial, and many species of sifaka. So, they kind of dance. They call the dancing lemur. They kind of dance across the ground when they're moving between trees. The brown lemur family is interesting. So we get the white-fronted brown lemur, which is really interesting. And they are quite vocal, garrulous even. And the red-ruffed lemurs and white-ruffed lemurs are the same. So they have, I was listening to a recording the other day and thinking, gee, did I record that in Rwanda? Is that a mangabe? No, I recorded that in Madagascar. It's a red-ruffed lemur. And so the vibrance of the red-ruffed lemur, its vocalizations, the habitat. I'm sure I'm missing something here. The woolly lemurs, the sportive lemurs, the dwarf lemurs, they are all really interesting. But I think people generally in their heads, the ones that will appeal to them that they'll know about will be the Indri, the ring-tailed, the black and white ruffed or the red ruffed, the mouse lemur, and the eye. And the first time I went to Madagascar about 20 years ago was I had to narrow down my wish list, and I said, okay, if I see one sifaka, one mouse lemur, one whatever it is, brown lemur, then I have some representation of the family, and I can get some sense of what's going on. And I think in general that is what happens when people go to Madagascar. They're all cute.
They're all cute. They all have their own special charisma. But just to mention, the Indri is a fantastic call to hear and lemur to see. I've got a great video which I'll post in the show notes of where we first heard them call, and my children and their just amazement at hearing this incredible sound. So if listeners are interested, click on the link in the show notes and listen to this absolutely amazing and loud, like boomingly loud call.
No, no, no. Look, the Indri call, I think, is in a microcosm exactly the joy of surprise in Madagascar because it is so unexpected, and I can just imagine that the expressions on your kids' faces because it is a primate call unlike any other, and it kind of summarizes, I guess, how you experience Madagascar. It's not what you expect, and it kind of blows you away.
Even just listening to the recording, I still get goosebumps. It's really a goosebump moment that. So we're getting towards the end of our time here, Chris, but there's a couple of questions I don't want to miss out on. You've given us a lot already, but perhaps you can think of a surreal or kind of unexpected moment that happened on a visit to Madagascar, whether that was your first visit or a recent one to Masoala, something that stands out as incredible.
Yeah, first Indri sighting for sure, like your kids. I probably looked exactly like your kids. First giraffe-necked weevil, also. First Parsons chameleon, same thing. I mean, that's a chameleon that's a foot long, that's the world's biggest chameleon. First Brookesia, the micro chameleon, that's the size of your thumbnail, similarly. Maybe my first Fonsera, it's kind of a semi-arboreal mongoose that just pops out of nowhere, and it's quite confiding. I've had a couple of experiences with them, but I had one, I think it was in December last year, where a mother came out with her sub-adult or cub, and the way they explored the forest while I just sat there and they ignored me was, I love that. It's like you get a privileged insight into an ecosystem without having any impact on it, and it wasn't the most bizarre creature or whatever. It was just the intimacy of an undisturbed ecosystem in Madagascar.
Oh, lovely. What about some activities at Masoala Forest Lodge that guests can enjoy? And also perhaps touching on the cultural aspects, village visits, as well as the wildlife and the sea that you've got there.
Yeah, it's a question we get a lot. Is there enough to do in 3 or 4 days? And there's enough to do in 14 days. You don't need to repeat in 14 days. So, look, the things that I particularly like as a naturalist and a terrestrial guy are the walks in the primary forest, walks in the coastal forest, and night walks. So 3 different ways of experiencing those habitats and looking for different creatures. So whether it's chameleons in the leaf litter or mouse lemurs at night or Vonsera again in the primary forest. So that would be sort of the terrestrial nature orientated, and there's lots of variations on that. So walks to local waterfalls or as I say, into the primary forest or night walks and so on. Then there's the marine element. So there is boating, there's whale watching, there's kayaking, there's swimming, there's snorkeling, there's day trips to the south to the peninsula, at the tip of the peninsula in the south. There is a sailing sort of sunset cruise in a adapted pirogue in Galoa. There is pirogue on the freshwater rivers. There's little islands that you can get to and explore. Massages, and that would be the last one I think of, but I'm glad I remembered that. And then the community element, which is really interesting. And I think this is interesting because there's nothing staged or set up about it. And we tend not, I mean, you can wander off and do it any day on your own accord, but we tend to do it on Fridays where we have a traditional meal in camp. So the idea is to show people the way people live locally. So we'll go and visit the village. We'll see how rice is cultivated, how to pollinate vanilla, or whatever, what a clove tree looks like, cinnamon, getting the smell of the wood of the cinnamon, getting into the village and seeing the guys coming back and preparing their fish. And then, and just seeing how people live, so we kind of founded a school there and, that's why I say it's structured in terms of it's Friday, the kids are kind of expecting you, so you're not disrupting class. It's a primary school, so it's preschool and a primary school. And then after all of that, getting back to camp where you'll find traditional cloth on your bed, and you're expected to come back to dinner wearing that traditional cloth in whichever way you might have noticed it was worn during the day in the village, and then eating a traditional meal in a traditional way. So served on palm leaves, eaten with palm leaf utensils that are kind of folded out of the leaf. And it's almost like tapas in a way, I guess. informal, and you can pick and choose and mix and match. And and I think it's interesting because, like I said earlier, I think the reward of travel is to get these privileged and ad hoc, spontaneous insights into other cultures, and that gives you a chance to reflect on your own culture, whatever that culture might be. Are there any other activities? I'm sure I'm forgetting plenty. But you could break it down into land, sea, culture, and freshwater. Lots of swimming. Yeah.
I really, just to touch on the culture part for a second as well, I really love meeting the people of Madagascar. They are really genuinely wonderful people. And I can imagine this interaction that's not staged. Really, people go home with a true appreciation for who the Malagasy are as people. Of course, they're very diverse, and you'll meet different tribes the further you travel over Madagascar. But it's really a wonderful experience. And going back to how you described how people came from Southern Asia or Southeast Asia and from Africa, it's really a cultural melting pot and fascinating for visitors to see and understand.
Yeah, gentle, kind, friendly people. You're totally comfortable sharing stuff with you. I really like them.
Yeah, genuinely amazing people. So, Chris, if our listeners, I'm sure they are very excited to visit Madagascar now. I hope, after hearing about everything they can do and see and explore on this magical island, let's hope, if they are interested in finding out more about your lodge there, Masoala Forest Lodge, where's the best place for them to go to find out more?
The internet, so websites and social media, I guess. So we're wild-expeditions.africa, and you'll find in the country or the camp or the expedition information there, reference to Masoala or the Blue Lagoon. And then and there's a masoalaforestlodge.com site as well. And then the same for social media. So Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, depends, I guess, which way you search, LinkedIn. And those are all wild.expeditions.africa, with and without punctuation, and the same for Masoala Forest Lodge on all of those platforms. So Google, and never mind ChatGPT, very clever these days. You'll find it.
Yeah. And I would just specifically for this destination, more so than potentially the others, except potentially Congo, I would recommend that people speak to their travel agent that they've worked with before, or of course they could speak to us at Leopard, just because the logistics are fairly complicated. And if you want to combine two destinations in Madagascar or anything like that, it's really good to deal with a local African agent.
100%. I don't think it's the kind of destination that you book an Airbnb for and hope that Uber's going to arrive. You speak to someone who knows it and you put it together in the way that's going to be most seamless.
Great. Thank you so much for your time today, Chris.
Absolute pleasure. Thank you. It was nice to see you, and thanks for the opportunity to chat about Madagascar.
It's been great. Thank you for listening. Leopard specializes in curating extraordinary journeys. Get in touch with us to help you plan the trip of your dreams.